With current world events, I've had a lot of time on me recently, and I've been catching up on lots of classics and some really good films. One of those really good films was Inception, which I finally watched for the first time. And I love that film so much that I looked in my pile of Blu-rays to watch and I realised just how long the Dark Knight trilogy had been sitting there. So I set out to watch all of Nolan's films. And when I finished, Christopher Nolan became my all-time favourite director due to how phenomenally clever he is and how clear it is that he understands the art form so well and that he can turn the most simple premise, such as a drama or a war film, into something epic, awe-inspiring and just a jaw-dropping piece of filmmaking. So this is going to be my ranking of his 8 films. Some spoilers ahead for some of these films, and I did rewatch some of these films for this list, so all my thoughts and opinions in this video are fresh and current with the way I feel about them. At number 8, I have put Dunkirk, and this is not a bad film just because it's at the bottom of the list. It's actually a really good film, a phenomenal one in fact, and watching this in IMAX when it came out a few years ago was the best experience I've ever had at a theatre. It's a very tense film with some great performances, some of Nolan's best shots, and a real sense of danger and fear despite knowing the outcome of this event. And Nolan really portrays how horrific this and both world wars were, with barely a drop of blood and being well within the PG-13 rating. A phenomenal score from Zimmer, who consistently knocks his music out of the park for Nolan. However, I put this at the bottom of the list though because this and the film that I've put at number 7 lack the power and real oomph that the rest of Nolan's films have. The rest of Nolan's films I find have some sort of emotional punch or just are so good I feel so overwhelmed with emotion for them. And whilst it's a phenomenal film, I don't get that same feeling for this film. So I've put it at the bottom, but it's still a phenomenal film that I would highly recommend to anyone, not just who likes war films, but films in general. And I'm going to give Dunkirk an 8.5 out of 10. At number 7, I have Memento, one of Nolan's earliest films. This may be lower than many of you expected, as this is hailed as a masterpiece and a classic by many. But I do feel that Memento is a bit overrated, but nonetheless is still an incredibly clever film. Guy Pearce is great, and the final twist in the film is incredible and will completely transform my second viewing, which I've already planned for. The non-linear structure though is the star here, and while I don't think this is the best film ever made, it is stark evidence of how smart a filmmaker Nolan is, as he uses the limitations of cinema and what it can and can't do, and manipulates it and uses those limitations to make a film that completely stands out from the rest. He knows he controls what we see, when we see it, and how we see it, so he manipulates this to create a phenomenal twist that will completely change the film on repeat viewings. It's low on the list though because, like Dunkirk, it does lack Nolan's power and the punch of his other films that all of them have. And I would say that Dunkirk is a better film than this slightly, but I've put Memento above it because, for the purposes of a Christopher Nolan ranking video, Memento does show how clever a filmmaker he is, a bit more so than Dunkirk, even though I would say Dunkirk is a better film. However, this is still a very good film, a very good murder mystery thriller, and I'm going to give Memento an 8 out of 10. At number 6, I have Batman Begins, the start of Nolan's phenomenal Dark Knight trilogy. And from here and upwards, all of these films have what I've referred to as Nolan's power and the oomph and the punch that his films have. All of the films from here upwards have that sense of love or just the overwhelming emotion and punch that I've been talking about. Batman Begins is easily the best superhero origin story film that we've had so far. And its focus on Bruce's character and anger is what makes it so good, and makes it far more compelling after he leaves the League of Shadows after the first 45 minutes or so. It's this film's devotion to being so focused on Bruce's character and honing his anger and his pain and his sorrow and his sadness at what has happened to him in his past that makes his character so compelling, and therefore the rest of the trilogy as you care for him so much. The film has a thoroughly entertaining and propulsive plotline, and of all of Nolan's films, I would say that this is probably his most purely entertaining. It's got some great villains, some very cool visuals, and the shot with Batman emerging from the dark behind Scarecrow is one of my favourite shots of the whole trilogy. But it's the focus on character that make this a perfect origin story, and without Nolan's attention to Bruce's fear and anger, the rest of the trilogy couldn't be as good as it is. And I say this is only just my least favourite of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, because it doesn't have as strong a sense of the underlying themes that I get from the other two at least, especially its sequel. Batman Begins is nonetheless a phenomenal film, like I said, easily the best superhero origin story film we've ever had, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. In number 5, I've put Interstellar. When I first watched Interstellar years ago, when it first came out on Blu-ray, the last act completely baffled me, so I didn't like the film at all, just thought it was rubbish and forgot about it. However, after rewatching the film for this big Nolan binge of mine, I understood the ending, and so I could see exactly what Nolan was doing, and the feelings and themes and ideas he was going for. The third act is key to the film, and the film is one of Nolan's longest at 2 hours 45-ish. The film does take its time, which perhaps is its one flaw, but that third act delivers so much emotion and beauty, and just raw power and that punch I've been talking about, that makes all that time spent before so worth it. This is Nolan's most human film, and emotionally driven one, and is again tons of evidence of how smart Nolan is, and how he has a mind as a filmmaker just beyond my understanding. He gives the audience so much science, some of which I have never ever encountered before, but it makes sense, and he can explain it in 2 minutes without it feeling like annoying talking down to the audience exposition, which again is evidence of how smart he is. He must have had some background in science, or maybe his brother did, because this is a film Nolan wrote with his brother Jonathan Nolan. To be able to pack this much science and have it make complete sense to an audience is phenomenally smart, and that takes real skill, far more than I think many people would realise. And the visual effects, one of the few times Nolan has had to use a fair amount of it, is flawless and some of the best ever put on film. We go into black holes, we go to distant galaxies, we go through wormholes. It's phenomenal, stunning, stark imagery that would just look phenomenal on an IMAX screen, and I wish that I could have seen it in IMAX. Hans Zimmer's score is once again astounding, all because of that one theme, and if you've seen the film, you know exactly what theme I'm talking about, because it is a beautiful theme that evokes so much beauty and power. And despite taking us through black holes and distant galaxies, the film is very much grounded and down to earth, excuse the pun, and ultimately about the love between a father and daughter, and how that love transcends space, time and science. This creates an emotionally hard-hitting blockbuster like no other, and I love Interstellar so deeply now that I can see what Nolan was doing with the film. Give it its time, watch the whole thing, and you will see how beautiful a film Nolan has crafted. I'm going to give Interstellar a 9.5 out of 10. In number 4, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with this, I've put The Dark Knight Rises. I know a lot of people think this is the worst of Nolan's films, and the worst of the Dark Knight trilogy. But to be honest, I just don't understand that. I hadn't seen the film before my Nolan binge, but to me, this is the definition of a film epic, with huge scope, and Nolan's widescreen IMAX aspect ratio fills the screen for almost the entire 2 hour 45 minute runtime, pulling you in and creating a sense of scope, scale, awe, and just a jaw-dropping sense of overwhelming magnitude that only the best film epics have. And much like Interstellar, Nolan focuses on his characters and gives Bruce his true payoff that we've been waiting for this whole trilogy. Bruce's desire to simply have his own life and not be Gotham's only hope, but to be a symbol of hope for change. To a city so lost to corruption, is a heart-wrenching one, and a desire we all deeply understand, especially as the previous two films are so good. And it's what drives his decision, in the end, to give his life up to Gotham, and to die for it, or, in some minds, depending on how you see the ending of the film, to start anew, knowing he can never return to help the people again, just hoping that his sacrifice was enough to save Gotham and give it the hope it's needed for so long. This is easily Bale's best performance as Bruce Wayne in the trilogy, and everyone else in the film is great too. Tom Hardy is a phenomenal villain in Bane, very intimidating, and Anne Hathaway is a great counter to Bruce, making their eventual love feel all the more real. And Nolan shows how he's a master of juggling blockbuster scale with character and soul here. It does stumble a bit and lose itself with a segment where Bruce gets sent to the prison that Bane was sent to when he was young, and the big surprise villain is a bit underwhelming because they reveal themselves and then die 5 minutes later, and I thought Bane was a phenomenal villain anyway, we didn't need someone overruling him. But other than that, The Dark Knight Rises, to me at least, is the perfect payoff to Nolan's crowning trilogy, and, in my mind, one of the best trilogies of all time. So I'm going to give The Dark Knight Rises a 9.5 out of 10. At number 3, I have The Prestige. This is a film that many people, despite knowing who Christopher Nolan is, may not know about. But this is a period drama unlike anything I've ever seen, and it will completely blow you away once you watch it. Go in knowing nothing. Don't let yourself know any of the plot other than the fact it's about a basic rivalry between magicians. Don't know the twists. Don't know any of the events that happen. Just watch it and you will be amazed. It's a riveting, tense, shocking, dark thriller with Hugh Jackman and Bale on top form. What makes it so good is that despite simply being about two magicians and their obsessive rivalry, which eventually leads to fatalities and dangerous one-upmanship, this is Christopher Nolan though. He doesn't make any regular films. He's not going to make a boring old period drama about two magicians. So instead, he plays the film like he is a magician performing a 2-hour-long magic trick. Nolan so carefully chooses what he shows us, when he shows us information, and again, uses the limitations of the art of filmmaking and cinema to his advantage. In not knowing what happens next, or what shots mean for the film as a whole when first watching it, he hides his two central tricks in plain sight. One scene in particular, looking back, is so blatantly obvious, it's ridiculous the fact he gets away with it. It literally shows us one of the two central twists, and we can't pick up on it if you don't know what one of the twists is. This is evidence of why I love Nolan so much, as he takes what the art form can't do, uses it, manipulates it, and then ultimately boosts his film to levels very few filmmakers can, in ways very few filmmakers can. He clearly knows and understands the art form so much to be able to use it in such ways no other director can, or I have personally seen ever do. He takes us to heights cinema's never been with Inception and Interstellar, and shows us how incredible film can be and where it can take us beyond what we have actually discovered in our lifetime yet. But he then uses what cinema can't do to make an equally jaw-dropping experience, one without futuristic machines and wormholes. It's one of those films you have to see to truly understand what I mean and to believe how incredible it is. And once you watch it, you too will be amazed. The final shot and line is practically Nolan winking at the character saying, "Got ya." Watch it, be fooled by Watch it and be fooled by Nolan's masterful trick and the magic he displays of filmmaking. Prestige is of course a 10 out of 10. In the runner-up spot at number 2, I have Inception. My top 2 here were incredibly close, and you all know what the number 1 is going to be. It was highly unlikely that was going to be anywhere below the first or second spot. But my top 2 were incredibly close, and this is runner-up just barely. The reason that this is towards the top of Nolan's absolutely incredible career, and one of my personal all-time favourite films, is because I've never seen a film, let alone a blockbuster, work on so many levels, both plot-wise and genre-wise. It's a blockbuster, it's an action film, it's a thriller, it's a mind-bending sci-fi, it's a heist film, it's a tragic romance. But deepest of all, it's a film about redemption. The plot literally operates on 4 different layers of dreams and reality at once. I can't hammer home the fact that the film works on so many levels other than saying that. The characters are great, the central heist is thrilling, and Zimmer's score is one of the best ever, purely for that final theme alone in the final scene. But it's Leonardo DiCaprio's performance and his soul and character who truly carry the film. His journey of redemption and grief over his dead wife, who is literally locked in his mind, is a heart-wrenching one. His character is the reason the film is so highly regarded and is still talked about and remembered after a decade. Yet it is just so entertaining on top of all of that. Inception is the prime example of Nolan's ability to imbue blockbuster action with soul and character. With Inception, Nolan, in the words of Tom Hardy's Eames, wasn't afraid to dream a little bigger, and of course it's a 10 out of 10. At number 1, you all saw it coming, it's the number 1 of practically everyone's Nolan list, is The Dark Knight. This is the best superhero film of all time, by an insurmountable distance, and this is one of the best films of all time, period. The Dark Knight is the crown jewel of Nolan's career, despite having barely any of his time trickery or signature sci-fi stylings. It's a film about morality and what it means to be moral when everyone around you is so corrupted, selfish, and just beyond saving because of that corruption. We have one of the true best villains in film history with Heath Ledger's Joker, may he rest in peace. A man so hell-bent on pushing Batman to his limits. What's so great about Joker is, of course, Heath Ledger's out-of-this-world performance, but also the fact that there is nothing to him but his desire for chaos. He purely, as Alfred says, wants to watch the world burn. He can't be killed because that's against Batman's morals, and because killing Joker would cause more chaos, giving him what he wants. This is what drives the film, this central tussle and this push and pull between Batman and the Joker, who's pushing Batman ever closer to breaking his moral code, which creates underlying themes no other comic book film has. Nolan chose to make a sprawling, epic crime thriller about an unhinged, insane thing, not even human, that's how far down the Joker is in terms of insanity, pushing someone dressed as a bat to killing him and losing his morality. Harvey Dent's descent from hero to murderer is used by Nolan to phenomenal effect to show us just how unsavable Gotham is, making Bruce's final actions at the end of the film all the more impactful as he fights to give Gotham hope, no matter what the cost. Jim Gordon and Gary Oldman are at their best in the trilogy here, and Aaron Eckhart brilliantly portrays Dent and his downfall to soul-crushing effect. The Dark Knight is Nolan's greatest achievement, and a phenomenal film outside of any director's career. The Dark Knight is a film that will remain forever written in the history books of cinematic history. Of course it's getting a 10 out of 10, because it is truly one of the best films ever made. If you have not seen it, and you say you like superhero films, then I'm sorry, you're not a fan of superhero films. It's the best superhero film of all time, and one of the best films of all time. So, of course, it's got to be at the top of Christopher Nolan's career. As I said, after watching all these films, I have a really deep respect for Nolan, and you could probably tell from the way I was speaking about some of these films. I love the director so much, I cannot wait for Tenet, which I will immediately watch on an IMAX opening night. And I love Nolan so much, he is my favourite director, and all of his films are phenomenal films, even the ones at the bottom. That was my ranking of Christopher Nolan's films to date, and I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.